Welcome to Learning English, a daily 30-minute program from the Voice of America. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson. This program is aimed at English learners, so we speak a little slower and we use words and phrases especially written for people learning English.
Today on the program, you will hear from Brian Lynn and Ann Ball. Later, Kelly Jean Kelly will bring us America's Presidents. But first, a corruption case that had already shocked Asia took a surprising turn last month. Patrick Ho, a Chinese citizen and former official of Hong Kong, faces corruption charges in the United States. The U.S. accused him last year of trying to buy favors from African officials to help a Chinese company. The U.S. also accused a former Senegalese foreign minister, Sheikh Gadyo, in connection with the crime. But last month, U.S. federal lawyers dismissed Gadyo from any charges. In answer, Ho's lawyers urged a federal judge in New York to release their client, too. It was the fifth time they have requested that Ho be released from jail while he waits for trial. But their request was refused again. Government lawyers also announced Gadyo had agreed to help them in their case against Ho. Gadyo's help will provide strong evidence of Ho's guilt, government lawyers told the court. The case raises the issue of what some call an open secret, widespread bribery of foreign governments by Chinese companies seeking international business deals. Chinese President Xi Jinping is currently operating a well-publicized campaign against corruption within China. However, Chinese officials have not yet brought any foreign bribery case against a Chinese company or business leader. Patrick Ho and Sheikh Gadyo were arrested in New York last November. Government lawyers for the U.S. say the men bribed African officials in order to help a large business called CEFC China Energy. At the time, Ho led a non-governmental group that was supported financially by CEFC China Energy. Gadyo was a member of Senegal's parliament and also operated a business advising company. Ho and Gadyo reportedly planned to give $2 million to Chad's president, Idriss Déby. In return, he reportedly would help CEFC China Energy enter into Chad's rich energy business. Ho also reportedly paid $500,000 to Sam Kutesa, the Ugandan foreign minister. That reported bribe was to help CEFC China Energy gain business agreements in Uganda's financial and energy industries, lawyers claim. The charges against Gadyo were never presented to a grand jury. However, Ho was officially charged with several crimes of foreign bribery and money laundering. Ho pleaded not guilty. U.S. government lawyers have in the past charged American and European companies with paying bribes to Chinese officials. But they have never before tried someone from a Chinese company on charges of bribing foreign officials in exchange for business contracts. At Ho's trial on November 5th, U.S. government lawyers will say payments promised or made to the African officials were bribes. Ho's defense lawyers will call the money gifts to aid groups. U.S. government lawyers recently gave the court some official documents about the case. they describe what Gaudio will claim. Ho put $2 million in paper money in a gift box. Then Ho gave the box to Chadian President Idris Deby. When Deby refused the money, Ho wrote a letter promising $2 million to aid efforts in Chad. But, Gaudio will add, Ho never asked what happened to the $2 million donation. Not asking about it, Gaudio says, shows that Ho did not really care about aid work. U.S. government lawyers also said recently that they will show how Ho was involved in other corrupt actions. They say Ho offered a bribe to John Ash, a diplomat from Antigua and Barbuda. And they will say Ho was interested in doing business with Iran while the country was under U.S. restrictions. They say he also tried to organize sales of weapons to Libya and Qatar. One of Ho's top lawyers said he did not want to comment on the recent events related to the case. The lawyer for Sheikh Gaudio sent a note to VOA. Sean Hecker wrote that his client looked forward to continuing to work with U.S. officials before returning to Senegal.
On August 21st, 2017, millions of people across America stopped what they were doing to observe a total solar eclipse. But a new study suggests humans were not the only living beings who took a break from their usual activities during this historic event. A total solar eclipse happens when the sun, moon, and earth perfectly line up. Last year's total solar eclipse was the first one in 99 years to pass over parts of the whole United States. The new study found that bees went silent when within the path of totality of the solar eclipse. The results were recently published in the Annals of the Entomological Society of America. The research was led by Candace Galen, a professor of biological sciences at the University of Missouri. She found there was a lot of interest leading up to the eclipse by people wondering how different animals might behave. It seemed as if everyone and their dog was asking me what animals would do during a total eclipse, Galen said in a statement. Scientists had previously observed behavioral reactions in some animals during solar eclipses. These have included some forms of sea life, birds, antelope, and cattle. But very few studies specifically examined the behavior of insects during a solar eclipse, and none had dealt with bees. Bees are important for the growth of wild and agricultural plants. They help spread the substances that make it possible for flowers to reproduce through the process known as pollination. Before the eclipse, Galen and her team had been field testing a system to examine bee pollination activities. The system used listening devices placed in nature to measure buzzing sounds. The buzzing is caused by movements in the bee's wing muscles during flight. Galen said she thought it seemed like a perfect fit to use those same methods to look at bee behaviors during an eclipse. The researchers organized a team of about 400 citizen scientists and elementary school children in different areas of the country to help with the experiment. The teams were deployed to areas in 3 U.S. states: Oregon, Idaho, and Missouri. The 3 states represent different kinds of geology and climate. Very small microphones were hidden among the natural environment to capture buzzing sounds as bees flew from flower to flower. In some areas, light and temperature information was also collected. The sounds were then examined to measure the level of activity before, during, and after the solar eclipse. In recordings taken during the totality part of the eclipse, researchers heard almost complete silence. Only one buzz interrupted the quiet, the study said. However, during partial stages of the eclipse, 90% of the microphones recorded buzzing. This meant there was still widespread bee activity before and after the total solar eclipse. The researchers said there was some slowing of activity immediately before and after totality. Changes in light affect the bee's ability to see and find food sources and carry out pollination activities. Drops in temperature make it difficult for them to keep their bodies warm enough to fly. I'm Brian Lynn.
Some people claim they never forget a face. But what does that saying mean? Is there really no limit to the number of faces a person can remember? A new study has found that, on average, people can remember as many as 5,000 faces. That number comes from a group of researchers at the University of York in England. They published their findings on facial recognition this month in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, Biological Sciences. There have been many studies recently on facial recognition technology, but the authors of this study say theirs is the first time that scientists have been able to put a number to the abilities of humans to recognize faces. The research team tested people on how many faces they could remember from their personal lives and in the media. They also tested them to see how many famous faces they recognized. Rob Jenkins works in the psychology department at the University of York. He said the researchers' study centered on the number of faces people actually know. He said the researchers were not able to discover whether there is a limit on how many faces the brain can handle. Jenkins said the ability to tell individual people apart is clearly important. Throughout history, humans have mostly lived in small groups of about 100 individuals. But in today's modern world of big cities, computers, televisions, and social media, we meet and deal with thousands of people. the study suggests our facial recognition abilities help us to deal with the many different faces we see on the screens, as well as those we know, like family and friends. The results of the study give a baseline for comparing the facial vocabulary of humans with facial recognition software. Scientists have been working on computer technology to remember and identify faces since the 1960s. Today, facial recognition technology is used in many ways, including by law enforcement agencies to prevent crime and violence. Governments use it to keep secret areas secure and, in extreme cases, control populations. Some governments use the software to watch people and find out where they go and what they do. Even Facebook uses facial recognition. For example, when you tag or name a friend, Facebook technology may recognize the person's face from a different picture you had shared before. For the human study, people spent 1 hour writing down as many faces from their personal lives as possible. Some examples may include people they went to school with, people they work with, and family members. Then they wrote down famous faces they know, such as actors, politicians, and other public people. At first, they found it easy to come up with many faces, but by the end of the hour, they found it harder to think of new ones. Their change in speed let the researchers estimate when they would have run out of faces completely. People who took part in the study were also shown thousands of photographs of famous people. Researchers asked them which ones they recognized. To make sure they knew these people, researchers required them to recognize 2 different photos of each famous person. The results showed that the participants knew between 1,000 and 10,000 faces. How do they explain such a wide range? Jenkins said one explanation may be that some people have a natural ability for remembering faces. There are differences in how much attention people pay to faces and how well they process the information, he said. Jenkins also said it could be because of different social environments. Some people may have grown up in more populated places, so they may have had more social contact throughout their lives. The people in the study included 25 men and women students from 2 universities. They were between 18 and 61 years old. Researchers think age may be an interesting area for further research. It would be interesting to see whether there is a peak age for the number of faces we know, Jenkins said. He said, it is possible that we gather more faces throughout our lifetime. But, he added, there also may be an age at which we start to find it harder to remember all of those faces. I'm Ann Ball.
VOA Learning English presents America's Presidents. Today we are talking about Rutherford B Hayes. He took office in 1877 and was president during the end of what Americans call Reconstruction, the period following the Civil War. Hayes had a public image as an honest, dignified man, and even though he had ideas that were radical at the time, he supported moderate policies and measured change. One exception was alcoholic drinks. Hayes banned wine and liquor from the White House. Before Rutherford Hayes was born, his father died. Not too long after that, his older brother died too. As a result, Hayes grew up mostly with just his mother and his older sister. Later, an uncle helped raise him as well. As a boy, Rutherford Hayes was called Rud. He grew up on a farm in Ohio and spent his early years playing with his sister, who taught him to love books. Hayes was an excellent student, and in time he attended Kenyon College and Harvard Law School. Hayes started his career as a lawyer in the city of Cincinnati, Ohio. He did not go into a field that made much money. Instead, he defended people who were poor or in difficult situations. He also courted the woman he would marry. Lucy Webb, like Hayes' mother and sister, strongly influenced the way Hayes thought. Hayes' own views at the time were moderate. He drank alcohol, but not much. He opposed slavery, but he was not an anti-slavery activist. His new wife, however, was strongly against alcohol and slavery. She was part of social movements at the time to ban alcoholic drinks entirely in the United States. And she encouraged Hayes to defend not only the poor in his law business, but also runaway slaves. Together, Rutherford and Lucy Hayes formed an equal marriage committed to helping others. They were known for being friendly, informal, and welcoming. They also went on to have 8 children, 5 of whom survived to adulthood. Lucy Webb Hayes said her husband was always calm as a father and took time, even when he was president, to care for his children. Because Hayes had such a positive public image, it is ironic that the contest that elected him president was one of the most hostile in U.S. history. The full story is complex, but the general story is that Hayes was the Republican candidate and Samuel Tilden was the Democratic candidate. Tilden won more popular votes across the country, but in the U.S. system, the majority of voters do not choose the president. Instead, a few electors in each state cast votes. In a way, then, the states choose the president. And in the election of 1876, 3 southern states gave conflicting reports. It was not clear whether Tilden or Hayes had won South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. Even though the election was held in November, the debate over the winner lasted until the following March, days before the new president was to be sworn in. One of the most serious accusations was that Democrats in the South had prevented many black men from voting. If those men had been able to vote, they almost certainly would have voted for Hayes. In the end, a special commission in Congress gave the votes in all 3 disputed states to Rutherford Hayes. His opponents pointed out that the majority of people on the commission were Republicans. As a result, they said, the new president had earned his position only because of party politics. They called him Rutherfraud and his fraudulency. But in the end, Hayes was widely considered an independent president who operated outside of party loyalties. One of Hayes' first acts as president was probably his most important. He withdrew federal troops from southern states. The troops had been trying to protect the civil and political rights of African Americans. But white Democrats disliked the federal government's involvement in their affairs. Also, the troops were not very effective. So Hayes said, if Southern officials promised to obey the country's laws, protecting all people equally, he would end the federal government's occupation of their states. The officials agreed, and the period known as Reconstruction officially ended. But as the years went on, the rights of Black Americans were increasingly violated. As a result, part of Hayes' legacy is one of betrayal. His policy permitted systemic violence and racism to continue for decades. Another of his important acts was to reform the country's civil service. For the most part, members of Congress offered their political allies government jobs with good pay. But Hayes sought to change the rules. He wanted to give government jobs to the most able workers. While his goal was a good one, his action shocked and angered many members of Congress. The Democrats especially sought to weaken Hayes' position by removing the president's ability to veto their bills. Hayes fought back and won. By the second half of his term, Hayes had restored some of Americans' trust in government that had been lost under the two presidents before him, Andrew Johnson and Ulysses S. Grant. He had helped ease the tensions between the North and South. He had stabilized the economy. He had increased the power of the presidency in a mostly positive way, and he had prepared the way for major civil service reform. But Hayes is not remembered as an especially great president. He is often placed toward the middle, not one of the best and not one of the worst. Some historians suggest that Hayes would be better remembered if he had stayed a second term and supervised some of the gains begun in his first years. But Hayes had promised that he would serve only one term as president. So, true to his word, Hayes did not seek re-election. Hayes had always believed that the best way to solve the country's problems was to improve the education system. So, in his retirement, Hayes became president of two social welfare organizations. One aimed to provide a Christian education to blacks in the South. One of the people helped by that organization was the well-known writer and activist W.E.B. Du Bois. Hayes also led a group aimed at reforming the country's prison system. When he was 70 years old, Hayes fell ill. Although he had a big heart for children and for helping people, he died of heart failure. Afterwards, one of his sons began a new tradition in honor of his father. He established the first presidential library.
And that's our program for today. Listen again tomorrow to learn English through stories from around the world. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson.